Well, welcome, friends, to the Healthy Christian Leader. I'm Dwight Habermel, and I have our guest here today, Ben MacDonald, and I know that you are really going to enjoy this conversation. Ben, you've been a journalist with Global News, and in that exploration of, or in your work as a journalist, got into an exploration of faith that really changed your life. Yeah. And it's led you down the road of academia. And I know you're an emerging academic with a very bright future. I got a call from Harry Gardner from Acadia, and he was so excited that you were here today.
Great.
And so that's great. So you graduated with a Master's of Theology from Acadia in 2016, and then went on to Wycliffe in Toronto to get your PhD, and now back at Acadia, which is really exciting there. And you've got a family now. You've got a wife, Melissa, and a daughter, Josephine.
Yes, 4 years old. Yep.
Wow, that's quite a journey.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, take us back to the beginning of this journey that started out in media, in journalism.
Sure. I mean, a little bit too. I mean, I'm a preacher's kid. I was raised in the Anglican Church by my father in London, Ontario. I was born here, but London, Ontario was home.
Wow.
And so I really never thought I would do theological study. It was not on my radar at all for a while. I saw Dad do it and kind of went, I'll do my own thing. And I went into journalism because I was really interested actually in film and television and doing stuff like that, and worked for Global News when I graduated. I met my wife at the journalism school at King's College, and got hired by Global News as a reporter, videographer, kind of a one-man band.
Wow.
And as a journalist, you're really trained to ask questions and to be curious. And the more I encountered people and stories that they were telling and the difficulties that people were going through, I started to realize that really there's one question that matters more than any other. And so that sort of led me to theology. I always tell people that it was after the Moncton shooting that happened in 2014, I believe. I covered that news story, and it was so painful for that community, and it was such an eye-opening event that afterwards I really just felt like people needed Jesus more than they needed me to be sticking a microphone in their face. So,
wow.
And I should say that's not to degrade what good journalists do, but I really felt like I was called to something else. And so, that's what led me to theological study at Acadia, and the rest is history, as they say.
So now you're a journalist of the Word.
That's right. Yeah,
that's awesome.
Yeah, you don't stop.
Digging out the story of God's timeless communication with man.
Absolutely, yeah. Trying to probe those questions and go deeper with it, yeah.
I love it. Ben, why do you love theology?
Yeah.
And how does it help you grow in your faith in the power of God?
I think the shortest, easiest answer to that is I love theology because I love Jesus. And all of theology is sort of controlled by the Christological understanding of things. All of theology is a journey outward and back to the center, which is Jesus Christ. And I think sometimes, I believe in a big Jesus. I don't believe in a small Jesus. Jesus is the Logos who was made flesh. According to John, he's the one through whom all things were made. And so to study theology is really to understand the world that we live in. It's to understand humanity and our relationship to God and what it is that we're meant to become. And I think that sometimes people unfortunately get the wrong impression that maybe theology is something that is discursive and analytical and coldly factual on one hand, or that it's something that is mystical and kind of really out of left field and no one can understand it over here. But the truth is that Paul says, I think it's 1 Corinthians 4, says we are stewards of the mystery of God. And I'm also reminded of people who have understood theology as an act of contemplation and discernment, seeking wisdom within the mystery that is Jesus Christ. And so it is not just some coldly factual analytical process, but it's actually the very thing that the church is called to do as we grow in relationship with Jesus. I think it was the 4th century desert father of Agrius Ponticus said, to be a theologian is to be one who prays. And so sometimes I think we get pulled away from that notion. We think theology is something that only a couple of academics do in an ivory tower. But of course, if you want to make any statement about the God you believe in, you're doing theology. Right. And so I love it because it's so all-encompassing. It brings together everything. It makes sense of the world in which I live. Yeah.
No, I love it. And, I totally appreciate where you're coming from, because in my day-to-day life, as most people know who watch this program, I know I'm a design build contractor here in Halifax, and I lead the Aaron Ministry Network as well. And day to day, the just shall live by faith. Our process of living is actually one of faith.
Right.
And I often think of truth. Truth translates well into English as reality. And, I have to take what I see and translate it into the timeless reality that I find in Scripture, so that I can get the temporal to line up with the permanent.
Absolutely.
And
but it takes theology. It's a way of life, right?
It's
something that you're constantly doing. Right?
It is
constantly caught up in. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a compass. It's a navigation point. It is a roadmap. It is all of those things. So I love this. Why do you think Christian leaders need to take theology seriously and make time for growing in their theological understanding? And what are the benefits of being an ongoing learner while being a leader?
Yeah, it is so important to be an ongoing learner, and so often I do encounter, pastors who, have gone 20 years out of seminary, and they have their MDivs, and they haven't returned to school in any way or in any capacity, and they need somebody to pour into them sometimes. I'm reminded of a quote from the philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein. He said something to the effect of, "The limits of our language are the limits of our world." Everything that we do in theology, we process through language, and we articulate through language. And the core truth of the gospel remains the same, and it will always be the same message. But again, we are stewards of a mystery. It's not like it's a one-size-fits-all answer all the time that we can just point to and ossify and concretize and just put up on a shelf and say, well, there it is, because then we wouldn't need the Holy Spirit for wisdom, right? We wouldn't need to actually have discernment if the answers were all just written out like that. And the truth is that our culture constantly changes. The way we articulate the truth of the gospel to the world that we're in needs to be rediscovered with each new generation. There are new understandings of the world that we encounter. I'm reminded, I really do, I think of Friedrich Nietzsche, the atheist, but I still agree that I think he was right when he said people just simply cannot believe the way they once did, right? I mean, this is part of we live in what some people would call a post-Christian age. The world is not enchanted in the way that it once was. People approach faith differently. And when you study theology, you are expanding your vocabulary and your ability to communicate that timeless truth for a new age that needs to understand it in a different light.
Yeah, so it's not that ancient truth changes.
No.
The ancient truth is an anchor. It's a foundation stone.
Right.
But we learn to communicate it more effectively to a changing culture.
Absolutely. And those questions change too. The types of questions that people ask of theology will change with each new generation. I mean, we think about, the problem of evil and how it seems to be at the forefront of so many theological discussions. It wasn't always. and I mean, or at least it wasn't as prominent as it now is. And so our questions change as history changes and as we face new issues. I mean, we live in a technocratic society now where technology brings communities into a whole different way of communicating with each other. Well, that raises new concerns. And that means there's new avenues that theology has certainly tread before, but that need to be explored and maybe to go deeper with. And so theology helps us unpack all of that and helps us communicate better with each other. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting, because a lot of leaders, if you were to probably take a poll, or if we could take a poll right now, you'd find that many leaders got into the whole ministry stream in the first place to be able to share the living experience that they had with Jesus, have with Jesus Christ, to be able to, share the gospel and move the gospel in our culture. Yeah. But we're in a period of rapid cultural change.
Yes, we are.
I'm 60 years old, which, that's starting to get up there a little bit, but the culture has changed so much in my lifetime. But the amazing thing is for me to talk to my children who are young adults now, and for them to recognize and how they share, they've recognized how the culture has shifted even within their time frame. The importance of, in that rapid pivot that we've entered into, to stay connected into theology from the perspective of what you're talking about in terms of being able to communicate timeless truth is so important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as church leaders, the question of truth in general, people are coming to churches and asking, is this true? And they are looking to their pastors and their leaders to be able to supply that knowledge, You need to have some ability to be able to draw on our traditions and our past and the ideas of people and say, yeah, I do have something for you. I mean, at the end of the day, it does have to make sense. It might be paradoxical, and the church has that famous axiom of saying faith seeking understanding. So we are given the light of revelation first, but we do need to make sense of it. And pastors are called on to be able to affirm for people, yes, this is true. And there are things that we can point to. And so, having a breadth of knowledge there is really, really important. Anything that we want to say about our faith, any claims and confessions that we make, you're doing theology in that process. And so it is not reserved to a special group of people who are, called academics. I mean, they might spend the majority of their time there. They might make a profession out of it. But that doesn't mean that we don't have a responsibility. Again, when Paul says to steward the mystery, that's for all of us. And so to gain knowledge and insight of theological understanding, to equip ourselves so that we can speak into our contexts and communities, is all important. And you're going to develop that in church, but there's other places where that needs to grow, and to be able to relate to other people from other walks of life. This isn't about necessarily debating somebody and feeling like you have to master. That's such a Western idea that we have to master somehow the topic. But of course, Christ is our master. I'm not trying to master theological discourse. I am trying to converse with others and relate as best I can to them so that they might see the truth and the glory of God lived in their own lives, right?
No, that's so good because, we want to be able to communicate to this generation effectively. Christian leaders can put a lot of extra pressure on themselves. How does one's theological views increase this pressure or alleviate it?
I certainly think that if you're carving out time for theological study, then you're certainly going to bring a confidence wherever you go. And I don't mean that necessarily as it doesn't have to just be a confidence in a secured position that you have. Maybe it's a confidence of being able to question the secure positions that other people have. But the point is that when know that you've spent your time doing your homework, you're coming equipped, you're coming prepared to the conversation. You don't need to worry that, well, I'm completely in the dark when it comes to this topic. If you at least have a lay of the land, there's a sense in which we can move a little bit more freely. We don't need to worry so much that I'm going to please everybody, or that I have to go in one direction because I'm being told to go in this direction or not. If we've studied and we've put the time in, we're going to have that security, that understanding that, well, I do know a little bit about this topic. It reminds me of, like, if somebody has ever done a master's degree or PhD studies, in order to pass those, you have to take an oral exam. And that's a point at which you're surrounded by scholars who are purposely putting immense pressure on you. But your greatest weapon in those moments, and any good professor will tell you, your greatest weapon there is that, well, you wrote the thing. You know the information technically better than anybody in the room. And so I think for anybody in the church, as a Christian, to make sure that you're just spending time in the Word, that you're spending time contemplating this and going deeper with it, it alleviates the anxiety. One, because you're going to be growing closer to Jesus in that process, and you understand that you don't need to master it, but that you should be anxious for nothing. But also because you can say, well, yeah, I actually understand the conversation. I can be in this conversation. I can understand what's going on because I have a little bit of an understanding of the contours of what's being said. We don't want to be fumbling around in the dark when we're confronted with the questions that people have.
No, so very good. Tell us a little bit about the head and the heart.
Yeah.
When you get into theological study.
I think this again goes to this idea of, the theologian is one who prays. When we think that somehow theology is a disembodied discipline, then we're not getting it correct, right? I mean, theology is ultimately a holistic enterprise. It's something that is, it's a study of not just God, but our relationship to God, and therefore a study of humanity itself, and a study of how we as human beings flourish. We're made in the image of God, and so there can be no understanding of a healthy Christian leader or a healthy Christian person that is divorced from an understanding of who Christ is and what He is about, right? That's where we are oriented to. We're all being drawn to become more like Christ. And so to understand Him is to understand it's not just something that lives up here. We aren't creatures who are intellectual, I think, by nature. And what I mean by that is we're not just simply information-driven people. The Gospels talk about this as well, and so do Paul's letters, this idea of, well, I know what's right, but I don't always do what's right. If it were all just about getting the right information, we could do something about that. But we're habit-forming creatures, and we are what we love, right? We move in the directions of our heart so often. And so getting those things to align, being able to make sense of things, but also to feel it and to be in relation with the God who is everywhere, that's all important to the study of theology. It's all spiritual formation, right? And people talk about spiritual formation like it's something they can decide to do or not. That's not the case. Dallas Willard talks about this, right? You are all being spiritually formed. The question is how. So connecting the heart and the head is all important to the discipline itself.
No, it's interesting. In business and preparation in business and growing a business for myself, because of course I've shared, I work in both ministry and business. Marketing, when I came to marketing and reading books, I believe I've got it right, but they talked about the decision-making process of the mind is actually made in the limbic part of the brain, which is the emotional center. And, and so, of course, in marketing, you appeal to the emotions of people and desires. And so, you're helping us in this point of bringing in truth and the emotion, which is, often where we connect the heart.
I would say, our bodies store so much. our bodies store trauma. Our bodies, I'm actually learning more about light therapy and the ways that sometimes light is even, when you're sleeping in a hotel room, for instance, it's even picked up by your skin. It's not just through the eyes. So we're often, I think, a little naive about how much our thinking through things and our behaviors as Christians influence our thoughts and carry us forward in things. And it's one of the reasons why, the idea of liturgy, some churches might not think, you look at the Roman Catholic Church or something, you think, well, that's liturgical. We're equally liturgical on the Protestant side. It's just, it might look different, but it's all purposeful. Mm-hmm. And these are ways that we form habits and we embody certain things and we act out our theology and dramatize it, and our bodies are involved in that process. So it's a major component.
Love it. Why is a healthy view of God essential to a leader's view, essential to their personal health as a leader?
Well, I think that goes back to simply saying you're made in the image of God. And so there's no such thing as a healthy individual who isn't in some way, in all the ways really. If you're a healthy individual, you are imitating what Christ looks like. That's the definition of health from a Christian perspective, because that's what we're all being drawn toward. And so if you have an understanding of God that is severe and tyrannical, then you're probably going to be a pretty despotic person yourself. If you're somebody who has a vision of God that is not actually loving but just merely sentimental, then you're probably never going to grow into full maturity because you're going to tolerate things that are abhorrent to God. So having a clear understanding of the way in which God really is in his nature, and the balance between often what we see as the sovereign elements and the nature of his authority, and then the loving and merciful self-giving side that are all brought together. Understanding that as a holistic picture is the only way that we can be drawn into a right relationship and be right with ourselves. You are what you worship, right? There's no getting away from that, and you do worship something. So again, a theology that is rightly situated, understanding that what is the actual nature of God as a loving Father? How do we understand that? That's the only pathway to being a healthy individual. There's no other way around it.
Ben, now, we've had a conversation here and you've built a super case for this, the importance of health, theology and the health of the leader, and being the mission of the leader as well. I am sure there are those who are stirred to say, okay, I need to keep growing. And yet they're committed in the trenches of ministry in a local church setting.
Right.
They may be in a business context or an educational or medical context, but they want to be able to communicate effectively. They want to be able to navigate effectively. How do you grow in terms of theological expansion and growth in your own journey when you are not necessarily in a seminary setting?
It's a great question, and I understand. People don't always have the time they want to give to certain things. But I would begin with the fact that it's not important for everybody to be a theologian of that kind, right? I mean, there's a certain kind of theologian that we refer to when, when I think back on writing a thesis on, Wolfhard Pannenberg's version of prolepsis, and people don't need to know that. That's not ultimately important. But what does matter is that you are surrounded by a Christian community where these discussions are frequent, where they can happen, where they can, where you can be poured into and people can share their knowledge with you. Theology doesn't have to be, in one sense, this deeply arduous task, but the idea of pushing ourselves to be challenged by people who are punching a little bit above our weight, let's say, I think is all important to the Christian life. And to do what we can to say, where are these little places that I'm struggling, and how can I push into it a little bit further? There's so many resources that are out there now too. I mean, the ways that you can engage, whether you're watching this as a podcast or you're watching YouTube videos and things like that, there's some really great resources out there. And I think just carving out any time that you have to just pour into those things and to be around like-minded people who at least can talk and show you maybe, here's what I benefited from, or here's what I've learned from this. Take it slow. Understand it's lifelong learning. There's no end point to this. So you don't need to beat yourself up that you're not able to, go read Karl Barth's Dogmatics or something. No one's expecting you to do that. I have to admit, I think one of the things that's really helped is just an understanding of Christian history. Sometimes, it's like I tell people when they're reading the Bible, there's so much of Scripture that doesn't always make sense. And it can be really hard for us to understand, especially if we don't have teachers around. But what's important is that you know the story. I always say it's just important that you know the story. You kind of have to know what the overarching story is before you can make sense of it, right? I remember reading Samson to some youth, and they were going like, "What does that mean?" And it's like, you know what? Let's not jump there right away. Just know what happened in the story. And in the same way with theology, I think getting a kind of a grasp of just sort of some of the shifts that have taken place. And this is where I guide people toward, basic textbooks on Christian history. Kind of getting an understanding of like, what were the major movements that occurred? That's a great place to start because it gives you a sort of a time frame. If you can, I always put up timelines for people, and it really helps them situate discussions and debates, and it's a great orientation before going deeper with theology. Just knowing, what were the movements? When did the Protestant Reformation happen? And what was going on there? Oh, okay, when that occurred, all these other things in history were happening. It can create this vivid image in our minds, and that's a great place, I think, for many people to begin.
Dr. Ben MacDonald, just a great conversation today on theology and leadership, and it's been great to have you here. Thanks you for taking the time to come.
I appreciate being here.
And we will see you next time on The Healthy Christian Leader. Well, thanks for joining this conversation. I trust that you were encouraged and challenged by the stories and experiences that were shared today. Would you join us next week? You can find new episodes weekly in video form on the Aaron Ministries YouTube page and in audio form wherever you get your podcasts. Aaron Ministries is an interdenominational network of friends in ministry with a mission to foster healthy Christian leadership. Check out our website, aaronministries.com, for more information and resources, and on how you can donate to our ministry and potentially start a healthy Christian leader gathering in your area. Until we meet again, may you experience the Lord's blessing, grace, and peace. I'll see you next week.